In this episode, I interviewed the Managing Director of IFC Collective, Darren Wren. Darren is a civil engineer with a diverse and expansive career. He is excited about smart city technology and exploring this space further both in the cities and in the regional communities. We discussed a number of exciting areas of smart tech, including electric and automated vehicles, changing supply chains and revenue models, and how Australia can become smart city leaders. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
It's the Smart City Podcast, whoa, with smart city experts, here we go. Connecting smart technology, both big and small. Smart cities are making life better for all. Big data, emerging trends, self-driving cars and more. The Smart City Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hi Darren, how are you today?
I'm fantastic, Zoe. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much for asking me.
Perfect. Thanks so much for coming onto the Smart City Podcast. We might just jump straight into it. So we'll start with the past. So can you give us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. I'm a civil engineer by profession. I've always been involved in civil engineering from the day I left school, and I just love it to bits, and been so lucky to work across heavy infrastructure projects across a number of sectors, really, the resource sector, the transport sector, the water sector. So I've seen a lot of innovation and change happening both through my career and now I just look at what's coming and just see that as an exciting change.
Yeah, great. So what sparked your interest in the smart city space?
Initially, it was the shift in the supply chain and how the changes in supply and delivery will change. So that affects everything we do. So you're a fool not to start buying into this and having a look and just thinking, well, how does this affect me? And then it just became more and more exciting. I mean, if we look from ways of what's changing in our world now, it's how we buy our food, or even what buys our food. I think that is really interesting. How we listen to our music, to how we move about our planet, be it in shared transport, to the rideshare platforms that are out there, or the autonomous vehicles. So it's that change that's happening and how it's happening just really sort of floats my boat, because I like to look into the future. I'm looking forward to the day that my fridge is ordering my weekly groceries instead of me doing the weekly trudge to the supermarket.
Yeah, great. So what technologies in particular have you come across that you're really interested in exploring?
Well, I've been lucky enough to have a fantastic career with changes constant with technology advances, from concrete technology to automation and control technology. So, I started as a draftsman and ink and tracing paper, and now it's all 3D BIM modelling and sort of reality generating so virtual reality now is making a big part of our engineering and what we do. So, the subject now that's really getting to me is the automated vehicles. I mean, it goes without saying that all of these vehicles will be electric. I mean, no one's turning around about an automated vehicle that's petrol driven. So the associated infrastructure is really interesting me, especially around the power supply. Not only is it the vehicle, but from it's a really big mindset change in consumer and consumerized products, really. So it's how we think about these things is what's really interesting to me, and what I'm interested in exploring, especially around the language that we're using now. It was not about how we power our electric vehicle, but it's how we now use our electric vehicle to power our home when we get home from a day's work. So it's where you charge your vehicle and how you charge it, and then you start looking at about who supplies that power. So there's so much change happening. So I just find it extremely interesting.
Yeah, very good. Cool. Well, I think we've delved a little bit into the past. Now let's go to the present time and what's happening right now. I'm just interested to know what type of projects and things you're working on at the moment.
Okay, well, I've just recently completed a significant upgrade of a historic environment. It was oldest street in Australia, second oldest city. So so it was dealing with really old infrastructure and replacing it with new. And one of the things there was let's put in the smart city infrastructure, but it wasn't about the actual what's inside it and the Wi-Fi's and the cameras and everything. It was about being ready. So a forward-thinking council has actually turned around and said, well, while we're doing this, let's be ready for what's coming, even though we're not quite sure what it is yet. So that's
great.
What I've been working on right now. That's just completed, and now it's just looking at the where do we go next. I'm particularly interested in traffic enforcement infrastructure and technology, especially ones that are automated and ones that can just generate a ticket straight away as an infringement, and potentially mobile systems for that, putting that in existing vehicles, in existing assets that are owned by councils and government authorities. I love the thought of the asset management systems and automated pothole detection equipment. I'm really keen on exploring that further. And yeah, I'd really like to be running some trials on that in early 2018. The other one that's really, I believe, is worth looking at and starting to explore is road user pays infrastructure. With what's coming in our shift to electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, we'll see a huge revenue drop for government authorities. Vehicle excise and fuel tax and things will be lost. So we need to start thinking about how we do that and how we gather that money.
Yeah, definitely. So where do you think Australia ranks when it comes to smart cities?
Unfortunately, I believe we're a long way behind. And I personally put that between 5 and 10 years. If you look around what's happening in Europe, the legislation that's changing, and how they're adapting to technology advances, especially in Asia, then I firmly believe we're probably in catch-up territory rather than sort of pioneering the way forward.
So do you think there are good places in Australia or across the world or different scenarios that are really good environments to pilot smart city technology?
Yeah, I read an article a few years ago, and I forget the magazine, but it was around what a great testing bed Australia is because of the remoteness of the density clusters. So our cities and things are quite unique, and so you can ban them quite easily, and even sort of regional towns as well. So any local government and that with the willingness to give something a go has the ideal testing ground. So I think Australia is excellent places to pilot and trial stuff because of its uniqueness in the global infrastructure world and our density clusters. It's finding to me that council and that authority that are willing to give it a go. I think I really like what the Sunshine Coast City Council are doing in Queensland. I think they're leading the way in the country at the moment because they're willing to trial it. They've invested in it and they're really giving it a go in their smart city hub.
Yeah. So do you think it's just the big cities that we can trial this stuff in, or do you think we can do this in the regional areas as well?
I think the regional areas are fantastic for varying types of technology. So water theft and is a massive issue for regional communities and things. So people coming in and just filling up their caravans or just filling, just taking water, or power theft and everything else. So the smart technologies that are available to monitor and report that, I think, are excellent, and that will also help the local regions sort of control and manage their assets a lot better. So I think the regional places are excellent places, but it's I don't want to use the term horses for courses, but it's a different thing. You're not going to trial a road user pay system in a small country town, but water theft and things and sensors and things, I believe, are a great idea.
Yeah, so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's tailoring the solution to the local council or the local issues that area has.
Very much so. And the beauty of some of this technology that's now available, I think, is it's not expensive. It's not, and you only need to monitor it once. Once you've got your user pattern and everything else, you can move that piece of technology to the next location. So it's not a case you've got to blanket and roll it out across everywhere. It is a case of, well, let's gather our data here. Let's model this area. We can see when the theft's happening, or when the water usage is high, or the power drain is happening, and we can manage that around that. Once we've got that, we can move it on to the next location. So you're not investing in heaps of infrastructure. It's just having the right infrastructure so you can gather your data as quickly as you can.
So if a lot of this stuff is cheap and easy, what are the blockages, do you think?
There's many. From one is mindset and attitude, and lack of knowledge and awareness of what is actually out there and what it can do. Now, the waste the role that our waste management facilities and assets can play in controlling the pothole detection, to whether a specific property owner has paid their rates, and it's just bringing the whole thing together. And I think at this moment in time, we're very piecemeal in our approach, and we're not just thinking of the bigger picture.
And do you think that it doesn't have to be this big, flashy, matrix style scenario? We can have really simple things that can really help those regional areas. Like you said about the waste, people might not even think of waste when they think of a smart city, but that can be a foundational piece of infrastructure that can really help cities progress in that smart technology space. So do you think the trick is to, start small, look at little chunks that you can do, and then just build up from there?
I think that there's two approaches really that probably have to be run in parallel. The organic, let's try this here and see how that goes, and everything else. If you start going through those cycles can be quite timely to go through, but they're for if you've got a policy that we're going to adapt this, or this is in our city plan for next year, or our town plan for next year, that we will implement this and this here. Then running several things in parallel is probably the better way to go, or else we'll be the time thing will catch up with us all, and then it'll be, well, why haven't you done this? They're doing this here. So
do you think we need to change our mindset that if we're running a lot of things in parallel, it's okay to fail, which traditionally governments aren't allowed to fail? So do you think that mindset needs to change in order for us to do this?
I question whether advancing your data collection and your knowledge, even though it might not have worked perfectly first time, is a failure, because it's all about the lessons we learn on that journey. So I understand that the local authorities and that are responsible for public money, and it's the public that are paying for it. But if the public can see the end benefit to it and everything else, that ultimately their rates bills might reduce because of this and because of that and everything else, then...
Yeah. Do you think community consultation is really important in this process?
User awareness and definitely. I mean, I look at it's an education thing. It goes back to that, what's in it for me, really. It's the narrow thinking is not the right word, but it's just that limited knowledge, and we're in this world of knowledge sharing and knowledge. And people, the more knowledge we give out, the more people absorb and everything else like that. So let's not be frightened of what we're actually saying, and say, we're going to give it a go. This is what we're trying, and these are the end benefits that we're going to do, we will achieve.
Great. Okay. So let's do a bit of predicting of the future here. And how do you think that we can better integrate across disciplines and governments and industries so we can kind of come together to work towards a smart city?
Look, my thoughts around this are that I think if we're forever waiting for local authorities, governments, policy, then we could be waiting for a long time. So to me, it goes back to my previous point, that a lot of this could actually be consumer-driven, consumer demand around, if you take Norway, for example, they've already got 50% electric vehicles on that road, and now they've got to turn around and say, well, how do we get our revenue or whatever, or things. Germany are building 400 electric vehicle charging stations because of the drive in electric vehicles, and they have to have those done next year, and that's not including ones being built by Tesla. These are the German car companies. So the consumer drive, I believe, will overtake the legislative process and the drive to local authorities. So therefore, again, that ties in with the mindset and everything else. The governments, take for example here, by the time we get our electric vehicles, I'll go back to my earlier point about the revenue model for fuel tax and things would disappear overnight. If the take up is as great as it will be, and I see quite a few electric vehicles on the road already, then that user pays technology will be consumer driven because consumers want the electric vehicles.
Yeah. So do you think that electric vehicles, since we're talking about those, do you think they'll take off in Australia and in the next 5 years or so, or do you think it'll be longer than that?
The data that I've seen at the moment seems to think that Australia is probably about 7 to 9 years away from being an electric vehicle society, which is quite a long time compared to the rest of the world. All of the vehicle manufacturers now manufacture electric vehicles, but there's not many that are sold here because we're not ready yet. So it's a case of being ready for them and everything else. And again, it goes back to that mindset where I said right at the beginning that you're not charging your electric vehicle overnight at home. You're going to be charging it at the workplace where you park it for work, or you're going to be charging it at the coffee shop for 10 minutes where you jump in and grab your coffee. You're going to be using your vehicle at night maybe to power your house. That's the difference.
Yeah, I heard of a kind of swap and go system, like with your gas bottles, but you would swap and go your battery pack for your vehicle. So I thought that was pretty cool.
It is pretty cool, but some of the technologies now that in fast charging vehicles, you're down to about 8 minutes. It could actually take you longer to swap your battery than it will be to fast charge, grab your coffee and your sandwich and have your break and on you go. So it's that. But the other thing to consider there is actually who's supplying that power and where the demand's going to be driven. So the utility companies are playing catch up. But I think you'll find, please check this, that the power charging plants being constructed in Europe are actually being driven by the car manufacturers themselves.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Kind of, flip there, isn't it? And in Australia, how that would play out.
Very much so.
And if we go to renewables or traditional, or whether people would be okay with just whatever system we decide to go with.
Well, I was only talking to somebody yesterday, Zoe, and they were talking about how the smart employer will be having his own solar power for his building. The employers will come in, they will plug in their car. That employer can then charge that employee to refuel their vehicle. However, he can charge it at a rate that's less than the utility companies and less than what they'll be paying at home or whatever. So it's actually cheaper to do it that way. And the thing, so there's all these different benefits, and that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. It's a whole mindset change about how we do things and how we change what we do.
Yeah, we might even have like a Airbnb for charging your vehicle.
Potentially, yes. Yep.
Yeah. Wow. So do you think Australia can become the leaders in smart city technology or certain aspects of that?
I believe we already are. In certain aspects. I know the Sunshine Coast Council is receiving a lot of awards for their drive and their vision there. The electric charging, a lot of that's been developed out of Australia. One of the top three companies in the world, I believe, is Australian. So there's all of these. There are these hubs of smart technology, being led in Australia. There's scientific breakthroughs happening all the time around the world. So I think Australia's playing its part. So do we want to be leaders or do we want to be up there with the others? I think a lot of it is around, to me, is how we adapt the new technologies to our needs will make us leaders in our field, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and start again. There'll always be good ideas, there'll always be innovations, but through the globalization now of technology, manufacturing, and the knowledge share platforms that sit around the world, we're not in that isolated sphere anymore. If we've got to be our own entity, the skill is how we draw on all that knowledge around the world to make what we need. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think global collaboration will be a key part in Australia's journey?
Oh, very much so. It has to be. If you look at just go back to my basic core skills of civil engineering and how the design world's changed and how we talk about global design. I was only reading something this morning about this wonderful bridge team in Australia that was also supported from South Africa and things like that. It's just, we are in that global world and we have to think in that space.
Yeah, cool. So what are the emerging trends that you see that people aren't talking about yet?
Again, I'll go back to the two of the points that I raised right at the beginning. One is road user charging. That I think everybody's scared to talk about that. The revenue models for our vehicles will change and will change very, very quickly. So that's one. That is definitely, you don't hear a lot of conversation around it because it's sensitive. It is really, really sensitive. So the trends are the change again in the consumerism. We talked earlier about who's actually going to be providing the fuels of the future and where they will come from and how we do that. The other one is what I'm finding quite interesting is the importance of branding. I was looking at an entrepreneur list, top 40 entrepreneur lists, just where I live on the Gold Coast, and I found there was a lot of marketing and branding expertise being lifted up, and so we don't really talk about it. You think about branding and labeling and things, but that all ties back into, when you think about it, that all ties back into these smart fridges. You think, well, why do I need a camera in my fridge? It's not coincidental that the cameras in your fridge will be looking at the labels on your jars and they can see when they're empty or whatever, or when that's no longer there, that it's gone, that can reorder your food and things like that. So to me, we're not talking about that enough. We're just seeing the emergence of smart homes, just the technology coming in. But again, that's already around the world, and we're a little bit behind. So we're not talking about it enough to understand that, of where we'll be. So there's lots of little bits that are all going to come at us at once. So the trends, is just about our consumer models and how we do our whole business and how we're going to be paying for things in the future.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks so much. It's been really great to talk to you. If people listening, how can they connect with you?
Look, they can always drop me a line on my email, which is Darren.Wren at ifccollective.com. Hopefully you publish that, Zoe, with this.
Yeah, I can put that in the show notes.
Or just contact me through LinkedIn. I'm happy to have a chat and meet up and coffee and talk about these things. They excite me. I'm passionate about them.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time, Darren, and we'll talk again soon.
Fantastic. Thanks, Zoe. It was really nice to have the opportunity to talk about what I believe is really important.
Awesome. Thanks.
It's the Smart City Podcast. Whoa.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart City Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes can be found at thesmartcitypodcast.com. If you have any questions or comments for me or any of my guests, connect with me via email, zoe@thesmartcitypodcast.com, or via the socials. I'm on Twitter and Facebook @SmartCityPod. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
Smart City Podcast is what you're looking for.